Good evening and welcome to the London Spanish Book and Cine Fair 2020. This is In Between Cultures, Writing from a Distance. I would like to introduce the panel of writers that are going to discuss thoughts, experiences, and their creative process as migrant writers. At the end of the session, they are going to answer the questions you may have. Please welcome Karlina Veras, Leo Boix, and Gaël Le Cornec.
Thank you so much, Sylvia, for creating the space for us to chat today and for inviting us as well to talk about these things. First of all, I'm going to just briefly introduce myself, and then I'm going to pass on the virtual mic to both Leo and Gael, so we can just talk a little bit about who we are as people, as writers, and then we can carry on the conversation. Well, I don't know if some of you know me, but I am Karlina Veras. I am a Dominican writer. I've been living in London now over a decade, 14 years. Yeah, it's quite a long time. I write both in English and Spanish. Recently, I published a book of flash fiction in Spanish, which has now been translated into Italian, and it's being translated into English as well. And I also write scripts, films, and I'm working on a novel as well as a poetry book that I have in the drawer. And you know, as writers, that's what we do, right? Have things in the drawer and then they come out eventually. But yeah, so that's me. So passing on to Leo to tell us who we are.
Yes, thank you, Karlina. Well, my name is Leo Boix. I'm a poet, a journalist and translator. And I've been living in the UK since 1996. So I don't know how many years, but loads of years. So over 20 years. As you can see, I'm not in London. I'm in Deal, which is a little town in East Kent. You can see the picture behind me with the sea, the English Channel, and it's a very old town. And I'm basically based here during the lockdown. So I published many collections. I published 2 poetry collections in Spanish, and I've been included in many anthologies and books. And my debut English collection will be out next year in May with Penguin Random House. I'm really excited, and so it's, yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. And as a journalist, I write for various news organizations. I collaborate. I'm a frequent reviewer for the Morning Star. I used to work for ANSA News Agency and many newspapers in South America, El Telégrafo in Ecuador, and Miami Herald in the US. So I've got, you know, a journalist background. So yes, that's pretty much it. I'll pass it to Gaël now.
Hello, everybody. My name is Gaël Le Cornec. I am a film and theatre maker, a writer from the Amazon in Brazil. I write in 4 languages, so English, Portuguese, French, and Spanish. My work explores themes of identity, gender-based violence, and environmental issues, always through the female perspective. I work in theatre as a writer and solo artist, so I created many shows that reflect the experience of migrant women in London, bringing to central stage the voices of unheard voices in the UK. I also run my one theatre company called Footprint Productions, and now we started making films, which is great because I started writing films and getting commissions for it. So it's nice to kind of be applying that into a more, you know, in this time of digital age. It's nice to be going from theatre to film. And recently started also writing for immersive technology. And I work with a company called Limbic Theatre, which is theatre and mixed reality company that makes audio plays with 3D sound, audio stories, and virtual reality. I have a few projects on at the moment. I'm going to stop here for now, so I'll tell you about the current projects later.
Oh, that sounds amazing. I'm really, really I can't explain how excited I am to share this virtual stage with both of you, and I hope that we actually meet for face to face at some point soon for a coffee or something at least.
Would be really nice.
Yes, hopefully.
Would be really nice. Well, Gail, how about Gail and I go visit you?
Yes, of course.
Yes, for the day.
And we can all go for a swim.
And we can all go for a swim. I'm all up for a cold swim. Yeah. I'll do it. I'm such a sea person. I'm in. Even in 5 minutes it turned blue, then you still get it. But yeah, no, this is great. So yeah, so basically the chat today, people that we have, when we were discussing, Leo and I initially had a chat over the phone, brainstorming about what we were talking, that we're going to talk about today. And I was thinking how, because we're all three of us, we are not from here, but we've been here long enough that, at least for me, London is already home, and I can imagine maybe for both of you is the same. So I wanna start the conversation of the concept of what is home. Because, for example, people think because I'm from Dominican Republic, they go, "Are you going home?" And I'm like, well, actually, I've already done the transition where, for me, Dominican Republic, obviously, dearly the place where I'm from, and always love going, and all great. But at the same time, for some reason, London is home now, and so it's that kind of that switch that we make without even thinking or imagining. And then could it be that the country where we live now has become home, and then we could talk about another type of distance, maybe writing from a distance, that's black and white. Maybe the distance would be if we were already back in Argentina or the Amazon or Dominican Republic, then it would be different. What do you guys think about that concept?
Well, in my case, I think it's quite complex. I am from Buenos Aires, from Argentina, and I left when I was 20. So home back then meant Buenos Aires. But even though I was, I was brought up in a suburb of Buenos Aires, in Quilmes, in the south of Buenos Aires. So I never lived in the actual city of Buenos Aires. So I left that for London straight away. And then London became my home. And then from London, and now I live in Deal. So it's another extra home in a way. But it's very complex in the sense that I write a lot about memory and homes, actually, not only one home, but homes and language. And I guess I'm able to write about Argentina and the past and what I lived through and what I left behind, because I'm here. You know what I mean? It's because of that physical distance that you can write about those things. It's almost like when someone dies and it's hard to write something immediately, or when something really traumatic or really big happens. Sometimes you need that kind of time and space and distance. And in our cases, I think it's actually a physical distance. And it's interesting because you create this idea of home that sometimes is so subjective, and it's, I write about Argentina, perhaps an Argentina that doesn't exist any longer, or perhaps it exists within me. And every time I go back to Argentina, I feel like it's not the Argentina I imagine it is, or, you know what I mean? There's all these contradictory things. And it's all the same with us, I guess. When you go back to your country, you feel like there's something missing. There's this kind of,
Leo, I really loved what you said, that baby Argentina exists inside you. And I really like this concept of home being inside us, because I really feel that for me, for instance, home is where I am and where I feel comfortable. And when I moved to London, it took some time for that to happen, of course. But I was brought up with 2 languages. I'm of dual heritage. So I was brought up with Portuguese and French, and with the culture that comes with all of that. And so somehow, whenever I was in Brazil, I never felt completely comfortable You know, as a child, I always had this feeling of otherness in me. And when I was in France, I had also this, wow, do I belong? Do I not belong? And I think my work somehow reflects this, you know, this sense of multi-identity, which many of us have.
Absolutely.
And I really felt, so I like to adopt this concept of home is where you are, you know, and home is inside us, is our heritage. That's home.
Yeah. I can absolutely agree with both of you, and for me is very similar. Like when I write, mostly when I write in Spanish, for some reason, maybe because the memories come and the language is so important, and you know the way you brought up and you think. And I think if maybe, especially about my last book that is so quintessentially Dominican, you know, so colloquial in the language, that maybe if I was living in Dominican Republic or closer, maybe in, you know, places like Brazil or Colombia or the United States, a bit closer to home in distance and culturally, maybe that book wouldn't come, you know, wouldn't come to be. And it's really interesting that sometimes you do kind of, and Hemingway wrote, you know, about that, and many of these, you know, these other boom writers, and many writers still now, that, you know, you get away from where you physically apparently were born or where you are, and then you end up writing about it a lot, you know, and how sometimes we tend to use that anchor and as nostalgia and memory as an anchor and a bit, and I really love, Gael, that concept about, you know, the fact that home is where we are, because sometimes and it's not something that happens straight away, absolutely, but it's something that I think people would be in the world a bit happier if you know, if we would actually take that concept of just enjoying, you know, where we are.
And I think I would actually take that even further. I would say that not only is within us, but us writers, I think that sometimes home is writing itself. It's the actual process of writing, because I feel like when you are away from what you call home, sometimes when you're writing, you are actually at home. You know what I mean? You are, home is where you're writing, and in that moment, in that kind of process. And for us, it happens. You know, I also write in Spanish and English, and for instance, at the moment, I'm writing this this long sequence of haikus that I began since the beginning of the lockdown as a sort of as a journal, and I'm interspersing haikus in English and Spanish, you know, mostly in English, but there are some Spanish haikus, and it's interesting. Whatever you know, if I write in English or even in Spanish, I feel like, okay, I'm comfortable there, you know, that moment. You know what I mean? I feel like at home. So anyway, just to
and maybe I wonder, just to evolve what you just said, Leo, I wonder if it's this concept of writing being home for us, and the art itself. You're an artist, you know, if you do your art, that's your home. If it's connected to the fact that we are completely free to create. Creation is freedom, right?
Absolutely.
You can, of course, you carry your baggage of your heritage or whatever you have with you in the creative process, but you also let everything behind, you let it go, and you just yourself, with yourself, going like and really digging into it, and you somehow reflect a certain truth in this process, and that's a freedom, is to be free from everything else, and without having to respond to anyone. Unless you have a commission, then sometimes you have to justify your choices.
I did. I got, speaking of a commission, I got a commission from the botanical gardens, the Kew Gardens. They asked me to write a poem about a Latin American tree, the monkey puzzle tree, what we call in Argentina the Araucaria araucana. And it was really interesting because I was in Patagonia at the beginning of the year, and I kept thinking about home and, you know, my country back, you know, in Argentina and Patagonia. I've got links with Patagonia from my dad and the tree. And suddenly I realized that, you know, there is a name for that tree in England, and there are myths about, you know, the tree in England. So it's really fascinating, and it kind of I do think a lot about this idea of home and distance and yeah, and different cultures, and how you kind of write about it and make art out of those experiences.
You know what I find interesting somehow is that once I moved out of Brazil, I looked at my heritage differently. So the distance made me see the culture in through a certain perspective, and made me more interested in traditional culture and folklore. Maybe because of this need of being more connected to the soil where I was born in the Amazon.
Absolutely, yeah. I really think it's not only with us writers, but I think it happens in other arts as well. I have friends that are musicians and moved away from home, and suddenly maybe when they were at home they were doing reggae or another type of urban music, and then suddenly now they're doing merengue and bachata and things and mixing it, and it's just or not even fully, but blending that Caribbean flavor, because you end up kind of absorbing that from far away and going, well, this is actually and also like letting go of maybe complexes or any of these other things that maybe we would have, and going, well, you know what, I actually do want to explore that, and I think it is absolutely fascinating. At the beginning of the year, I went to see Isabel Allende at the South Bank, that she came this year to promote her book, and she was amazing. And she spoke about this concept of home, and it's similar to what you were saying, and you, Gael, and she was saying that for her, obviously, her home is in her mind, and her characters are her home and her family. And I find that so fascinating, the fact that there's when we write and we come up with these people, and some people could be based on people that we left behind, maybe people that we know, people that we met. What they say, there's truth in every fiction, and there's fiction in every truth, and it's really, really interesting, that concept. Really enjoyed that.
I'm interested in asking, Karlina, how do you write? How do you create your characters?
How do I create
you as well?
Because
you probably have characters.
For me, in Spanish, I for some reason I write in both English and Spanish, and the way I write it's like I'm two different people. I don't know if it happens to you guys, but maybe because I have the different experiences and everything. But I think in Spanish, I write my characters, I do base them a lot about looking back from memory, nostalgia. A lot of I grew up in a very maybe that's one of the reasons why I became a writer is my family, especially from my dad's side, very storytellers, family of storytellers, and passing stories and telling jokes and things, based on real life, but obviously they all add their taxes to it. And I think my characters in Spanish, they have a lot of maybe of some of these people, or not even of these people, but just kind of the flavor of Caribbean, of what I see, and a lot of phrases and anecdotes that I remember. And that's mostly it. And then in English, it's almost similar, but it's a bit different, because then when I write in English, I look more, it's more like an introvert type of work. Then it's more like a more so kind of inner work as a writer, if that makes sense.
And in my case, when I write, I mean, in both my books in Spanish, I would say they're very autobiographical. So the I is very much the me, but by saying that, I have to admit that I'm also interested in sort of fictionalizing that I, and sometimes adding voices or experiences from, let's say, from members of my family. So I create this I that at first it seems that it's me. It's me plus all these other stories that I heard from family or even friends, and I'm adding that story. And in English, I'm writing more and more about other things, other people. I mean, literally, I'm a magpie. I write about pretty much, I wrote a poem about Robert Lowell in Buenos Aires, or Hudson, or British explorers going to South America, sort of doing a bit of research on their work and how they saw South America. So writing sort of as if I was one of them. So rather than writing about my own experience, actually saying, if in fiction you can actually write as if you were, you can experience any character from any era and time. Why not doing it in English, in poetry? And it actually is a really liberating process, because people often think that poetry needs to be autobiographical and very much like your own experience, and sometimes it's really liberating when you read something that is in the voice of other other person. So for instance, I wrote I in my Spanish collections, I wrote about the experience of the dictatorship from my point of view, as if I was a little boy experiencing the dictatorship in Argentina. And then in English, I wrote this poem from the perspective of one of the torturers. So it's basically him in his story. So, and it's a really interesting process, because you suddenly see the same problem, the same issue, but from a different perspective, a different point of view, and it's actually quite fascinating, I think.
Just wondering if there is an unconscious choice of choosing in English to write about the oppressor, the torturer.
Perhaps it's interesting, because in a way it's someone I knew. Is the father of a really good friend of mine. We didn't know that he was involved, and then I knew. So I wrote this piece it's in one of my books, and then I wrote it in English, and I guess that distance again. In English, there is this kind of distance, perhaps because the language is acquired, and perhaps because I don't know all the words in English, and that makes it even more interesting, because I have to use the ones I know. You know what I mean? I've got, you know what I mean? And I find it really, it's almost like I've got 10 words, and I have to write something with these words, and that's why I guess I'm a bit more experimental in English. I could do it in Spanish, and in fact, the really interesting thing for us, I guess, is that once you start experimenting in one language, when you go back to the other language, it really, they're informed. It's almost like it's true that we are different when we write in Spanish and English, or Portuguese and French, and English, but there is this kind of, they're porous. I mean, sometimes ideas, come from one to the other, or you know what I mean. There's this kind of interconnected.
Yeah, it's interesting because each language is obviously a culture. In our case, we are talking about specific cultures, but it's also a way of thinking and a way of assembling words, and also a way of telling stories. That's what I realized. Because there's a very particular way of telling stories in English, that actually comes from this country. And when you start writing plays, you're like, okay, so your story needs to have a middle, a beginning, a middle, and an end. It needs to have one protagonist. It needs to have an incited incident, and the same applies to screenwriting. And we come from Latin America, where
all over the shop.
All over the shop, exactly that. And I'm super interested now in actually smashing this concept of this dominant narrative, that's the way we tell stories, because we are so used to it on TV and on American films. That's the concept, that's how you have to write. With an inciting incident, you have one protagonist, the journey of a hero, and then you have a middle, a beginning and ending, you have a climax point, and there are all these rules and these formulas. They do work, and we are so used to them that when we watch something or when we read something that hasn't got those steps, we're kind of taken aback by it. So I don't know, these questions I have also about how to write characters, because I'm currently writing a play that has 6 characters, which is already too much British theatre somehow. But I was interested in not telling the story of one of them, but telling the story of this family.
I think you can, and it's, you can, and it's absolutely interesting. I think you're absolutely right. Obviously, these formulas are there for a reason, and they've been successful because they work, and you know, especially Hollywood and all that. But obviously, Latin America novels, and you see, it's not the same, and in independent films. But I think you can absolutely grasp, you know, the feel of this family, you know, these 6 people, and tell their story. And there's been really successful films that tell, you know, as a collective, that tell stories of people and drive them through. And also, we are living through an era now, besides of, you know, so multicultural, so different, that I think slowly we are also more open as an audience. I think people are a bit more open to different things. Yes, it's going to be a bit harder.
No.
Yeah, you don't think?
I don't think so. I think it's the opposite somehow.
Yeah, in film is and theater. Yeah, absolutely. I see what you mean, because obviously I also face the same struggles when I'm writing, and when I you know, when I present it to producers or whatever they want, you know, really kind of ABC. But at the same time, I think it is possible, you know, you can just.
I'm really interested in something going the other way, because when I wrote my books in Spanish, they're mostly free verse, no structure at all. It's mostly narrative poems, sometimes even like really scattered and visually like all over the place, I would say. And in English, I learned about form. I learned about the sonnet. I learned about all these very strict forms like sestinas and ghazals and couplets and all these different forms. And so basically I applied that kind of experience from Latin America, that kind of messiness, but within that frame. And it actually it's really fascinating. It's almost like a corset. Like you know, so I'm really, in fact, my book, my next book has all these different poems in different forms that are very English. Like I write a Shakespearean sonnet, but with a Latin American twist, with Spanish words.
I love it. Yeah.
So you know what I mean. So you twist, you know, sort of subverting the form in a way. You're using the form, but you're taking it sort of a step further. And it's actually it's an interesting process, because you know, sometimes I write something and I realize it is a sonnet, because it has 14 lines, because there's a rhyming scheme perhaps, or I'm trying to tell a story, it's quite narrative, or there is a twist at the end, or those things. And so yes, sometimes it helps, you know, those very traditional forms, but I guess because we bring in something different from, you know, other culture, you know, that's you know.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. And another thing, when you were talking about words, and I want to come back to the concept of language, because I think it's really interesting. For example, I have a lot of writer colleagues and friends that live especially New York City, and because of the way that they were raised and the way that they were living, it's the way they write. It's very much in a Spanglish type of way. You know, and it's also, you know, it also has its charm. You know, it's really interesting, and I think you know, and many of them consider themselves Dominican, but obviously they're American, but they are also Dominican, and it's you know, it's I think as writers, then is how do we have that inner struggle, put it onto the page and reflect it in how we speak and how we write. And I can imagine for you, Gaël, that you speak and write fluently 4 languages. Tell me, how's your experience in you writing, and how do you process all these cultures, languages, and process them in your brain and then put it onto the page?
Very good question. I don't know how.
I think it's amazing. Just the fact that you do it, it's great.
I guess it comes from associations that we have, a memory.
Yeah.
My personal memories, there are certain personal memories for me that are associated to my French heritage, you know, the time I lived in France as a child. and others that are connected to the Amazon. And myself as a young adult, the experience of being in a big city like London, if I'm going to write about a character, you know, in a multicultural city, it probably is going to be in English.
Yeah.
So it's connected to these different parts of me and the experiences that I had, and that's how the language comes, I suppose. And for example, I wrote a play called Camille Claudel. I actually ended up writing the final draft in English. It was the first time that the story of the sculptor Camille Claudel was written in English. She was known for being Rodin's student and lover, but I wanted to tell her story in her own words, and really putting her center stage. As I said, this is my thing, right? Put women at center stage.
Yeah.
And not without Rodin, basically. Dismiss him. Because a lot of his sculptures actually she made and he signed. That's what people don't know.
Wow.
Yeah, and in order for me to do that, I had to write a first draft in French. I had to write a whole play with the three characters of her life, so Rodin, her brother, Paul Claudel, and herself in French. And after I've done that, I ditched the play completely. That was a full 70 minutes play. And I wrote a one-woman show about Camille Claudel, which you know, has been performed in many places in the world. I performed it first in England, but then got a Stephanie Lear Award in the US, and then was
amazing. And you wrote that in English.
I wrote it in English in the end.
Yeah, but
from
see,
a French play.
But I find that fascinating, because it's also how our brain works, and how sometimes, you know, it's that concept that as writers, there's nothing that is really lost. You know, even if you ditch that 70-minute, you know, that whole play and all these characters and everything, and you wrote in a completely different language, but in order for you to write a 1-minute show that went so well, and I'm so happy for you, then but you had to go through that process and going through that language, and I absolutely understand that. I think that's also the magic, because you have to kind of submerge yourself, you know, into that. And I think that's, you know, that's one of the magics of storytelling.
Yeah, in my case, I was writing mostly in Spanish until not very long ago, until probably 5 years ago. I was writing only in Spanish. My journalism was mostly in Spanish. I was writing for Latin American newspapers. And then I realized that I was writing for an audience that was really removed from my daily life. So my readers were far, far away in Argentina and in South America. Even my readers, as you know, when I wrote news pieces, because for a news agency, my stories were published in major newspapers. So I knew that there were readers, but there were sort of imaginary readers I couldn't relate to somehow, because I was living in the UK. And then slowly I began writing in English, and that process changed completely, because I could meet people, and, you know, I could have my readers could actually come to my, you know, performances, and I could have a sort of direct conversation with them, and suddenly my reader was very much a physical. I could imagine a reader sitting there in somewhere in London or in the UK, and that made a huge difference. And also publishing in literary magazines in the UK, poetry magazines, because I realized that it's so important that notion. You can't write in a sort of vacuum. You know, the reader, that idea that someone is reading what you're writing, it's very important. And perhaps that's why I'm writing more and more in English at the moment, because I feel that I feel that kind of connection between my readers in the UK or in the Anglo world, I would say. But yeah, it's a fascinating thing.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting. And also writers, I go to talks, and, you know, and during lockdown, obviously this type of Zoom webinars as well. And one of the things that I do listen that writers always say, or not only writers, but I think artists in general, is how to have that audience in mind. You know, how important what you were saying, and you know, as immigrants and us as writers, and you go through that process that your audience shifts through time. And maybe it comes to a point that maybe you don't know who your audience is, and then it could be, obviously now, and it's great, but sometimes it could happen that maybe you're in that bubble, that you're still trying to figure out who you are as a writer. You're still trying to figure out, then consequently then the reader's also trying to figure out, you're trying to figure out who your readers are, and people are trying to figure out yourself. And I think that also has to do with the fact of being away and being present as people where we are.
Yeah.
It's beautiful, because I think with writing you can somehow build an audience in a different way than with live form, like theatre. I feel that my audiences has shifted through the years, exactly as you said. Maybe my work has changed and that has attracted different audiences. And also it's always a question of how do I attract new audiences, But somehow with writing, because it stays, and like theatre is so ephemeral, of course the play stays there, but the actual experience of it, of watching it, disappears. And with the poetry, we can say poetry is ephemeral. Of course, it is the act of writing as it's in itself, but it's it's there, and if you publish it, and throughout time, anyone, like 2 generations time, can read it.
Yes.
Yeah, it will never be the same though, because and it's also fascinating. Obviously, yes, it's there. It's one of the things that be there in paper, but at the same time, whenever anyone would pick it up, every mind, what they say, that every mind is its own world, and people will when it's interesting, you and I could be reading the same book or the same poem, and we will, I'm sure, live it in different experiences. And that's one of the fascinating things about writing. And the way that I think, I don't know what you guys think, but I find it really fascinating when you finish a work of art, in a film or a book, and it's out in the world, it stops being yours, and it's now the world's.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
and that's and that's amazing, because then you have then, and you talk about your own work, but it's not your own work anymore, because then, as I'm an avid reader, maybe firstly a reader, then became a writer, and it's that thing, how when how reading can kind of get so sucked into a story.
Yeah, with my first collection, Un Lugar Propio, I published it in 2015. And back in January this year, I went back to Buenos Aires and Patagonia, and I was just going from a bookshop, buying books, and I found my book. It was there in one shelf, and it was really moving. Actually, it felt like sort of meeting a member of a family that I haven't seen for like it's actually quite nice. It was out there. Someone can pick it up, and and it's true. Yeah, there's that physicality that I guess with theatre it's so immediate, especially the live performance sort of aspect, and the audience is so important. Well, audiences are important anyway, but in theatre it's just really you need that audience for
that moment. Yeah,
exactly, for the piece to come alive. Yeah, totally.
That's why I'm moving to films now. I want everything recorded. I want to have my work for the future generations. And by the way, I'm going to say this now very quickly because we might not have time, but Leo and I were published in the first British Latinx anthology of Latin American anthologies. This is it, by Flip I, and also other amazing Latin American writers. This is the only piece of recording I actually have.
Amazing. So it's called Un Nuevo Sol. And where can people find it? Let's do a little bit of
Leo?
Yeah, they can buy it. It's in the UK and everywhere. You can buy it on Amazon or in bookshops as well.
Amazing.
In foils. And it's really interesting because it's the first British Latinx Writers anthology. So it incorporates poets and fiction writers and people writing theatre, and it's a really fascinating idea of the British Latinx. So basically, we all basically creating this collective of writers from different backgrounds with Latin American heritage, different languages, and basically saying, okay, we are actually a community of writers. We can, you know, build this community. As you know, you were talking about your friends in New York, and because of the tradition in the US of Latinos and Latinas writers. I mean, they had it for longer, and they realize that there is something in common. They've got, even if you are from Uruguay or from Brazil or from Argentina or from Mexico, and you're living in the US, you know, even if you were born in the US, but you have some heritage that, you know, you share with others. And this is something I'm really proud of this anthology, because I feel, you know, it was the first one, and it's kind of the first step for a bigger project. You know, I work with children in schools in South London where 70% are Latinx. So they were born in the UK, but with Latin American, you know, let's say a Colombian mom and an English father. And, you know, it's really fascinating what you know, working and teaching them poetry, because all these experiences suddenly come in the writing, like going back to Brazil from South America. So yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah.
I think it's really important for the Latin American community here to have, you know, to grab this momentum, because for so long our community has been invisible. I don't like this word, but somehow considered invisible, that we
very quiet
voice.
Yes.
One of the things to prove we do have a voice. We have amazing writers. We exist, and we are using language in a unique way. And there are other things happening in theater and films that are saying the same. You know, there are other ex-writers going, "Hey, yes, I can do this," and take place.
I totally agree. And for me, I obviously, Leo, you've been here much longer, and I'm sure you could see the difference, but I could see the difference from when I first came here, the amount of Latin people that are here, and not only here, but that actually are, you know, voicing and that are using creative outlets, you know, the performers, musicians, theater. There's a massive Latin American kind of theater community, and now film and with writing as well. We are getting, and I'm just really happy to be a part of it, and you know, and just getting to know amazing people like you two and much others. And I think it's important for us to tell our stories, and like you were saying, those people, you know, and for all these young people to know that, you know, that they're not alone, that you know, that and that our stories matter as Latin American and as British as well, and it's more about kind of blending into
and I'm really fascinated, because when I came to this country, I worked as a cultural editor for a newspaper that now doesn't exist any longer. It was called Noticias Latin America. And I was in charge of the cultural pages. It was a magazine, a newspaper published in Spanish. And I remember, you know, I was from Argentina, and we had Colombian journalists and journalists from Venezuela, from Ecuador, from Bolivia, from all over Latin America. And I remember arriving there feeling very much an Argentinian. And in fact, everyone was joking about our different accents and different words. And by the end of the process, by being in London all together in that magazine, I realized that we were all Latin Americans. We were all sharing something. So it really gave me, the experience of migration gave me another identity, this identity of being a Latin American, which I really, really feel very much so, much more than when I was in Argentina, where I
totally relate to that, Leo.
Same. Yeah. And that's actually quite beautiful, because we gain something extra, you know what I mean? We now belong to this wider family. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, well, I think we've had amazing conversation, and we could go on forever because of this topic. I think it never ends. But Sylvia's here.
Yeah, I'm back here. It's been fascinating listening to you. And we have some questions from the audience, and I would like to start with this one. This is a question that could be for the three of you, but Leo said you needed to have a closer contact with your readers. But do you think that in this pandemic era still matters? Where are you based?
I personally, I found it quite hard to write in this vacuum. I write, and I've been writing these haikus, as I was saying, or writing my book, but I do miss that physical contact. I do miss going to readings. I do miss people coming after my readings and saying, oh, you know, your poem touched me, or what you're writing, I experience it as well. Even sometimes, you know, you get it online, but it's not the same. I really missed that experience because it informed my writing. Sometimes I'm writing something and I realize it's something that happened because of you know, the experiences I had while performing, or at a book launch. Perhaps not my own book launch, but someone else. And I'm part of. And at that moment, I am the audience. You know, I'm part of the audience, and I talk to someone about the, you know, the person who is reading. So I do feel that it's something, I do miss it, and I feel it's really, really important. If you're a writer, it's so important to be in touch with your readers, and to go to these events, because well, now with Zoom, you know, we can't see the audience, but we can you know, hear the questions. But yeah, I don't know what you Karlina and Gail think, but yeah.
Yeah, I personally, I totally agree in the fact that I have found the pandemic world a bit hard. I do miss the physical interaction or going to events, and I think there's a magic that gets created when you meet people. However, I think it's this time has also been good, because as a writer, I'm a very it's weird, like I can go out, explore, live the world, but then, you know, I kind of seclude and then I put myself into a bubble. So I have been managing to write and creating lots of things at the same time. I think that, you know, well, for your question, Sylvia, I think the audience for me, it's like I have different audiences. I have an audience in Dominican Republic, in the US, and all over the world, and I have audience in the UK. And it's just now how using the technology to our advantage, and hopefully hopefully very soon we'll be able to travel again and do live events, because I think nothing is the same as going to a conference or going to an event and seeing and having that personal touch.
Well, for anyone who works in live events, we don't have an audience at the moment unless we go digitally. So this is what's been happening in theatre, is to create digital events, which is not quite the same. So the audience experience it in a completely different way, obviously. So it's really hard for anyone who's been working in theatre. So that's why we have somehow shifted to new forms. And I'm currently working with a mixed reality company, creating an audio story with 3D sound, which actually brings the audience to the core of the story. So they are users, and the sound is in space with them. So they use headphones, you know, it's new technology.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating. Yeah, so I guess we are discovering how to shift, if you're in live event, into new forms of writing and of communicating to an audience, and finding new audience along the way.
This is a question that I think that it was what you said about what you said at the beginning. How can one embrace Britain as home when it is a home filled with stories of colonization, slavery, oppression?
I think it's really hard, and you know, by being an immigrant, you're aware of the history of the UK, probably more. Sometimes I feel it's even more. I mean, coming from Argentina, we had the experience of you know, the Falklands, the Malvinas War, so we experienced that very firsthand. This kind of notion that there's a colonial output very near our country, and so I think we are very aware as immigrants of the colonial past of the UK. It's been, you know, in the last year or even more, it's been highlighted even more with the Black Lives Matter movement here. I think is something that kind of informs our writing and it kind of makes it even more powerful in the sense that we know what's the past, even though some people here they don't want to know, or they don't want to listen, or they don't want to learn about kind of this history. And so I find it, I'm really fascinated by what's happening now, especially this year, and yeah, so opening my eyes in many ways. But there are these things I know from a long time. Yeah.
Yes, it is difficult, but I'm having a very interesting experience at the moment, co-writing with a Black British playwright and a white Jewish American. And we are telling the story of a Black British 21-year-old who starts discovering her past and how her ancestors came from Africa, went to Brazil, and then to Jamaica. So it's about the slave trade. So she discovers that she is somehow Brazilian, and then it opened to this incredible understanding of how slavery is not only about Black cultures, also it involves all of us, because at the time it affected the whole economy. It was actually, people were used as collateral. They were the economy. That's what was functioning, making the world function in the 18th and 19th century. And it's very interesting because it's also, as a Latin American writer, I'm looking at it through the perspective of the history of the connection with Brazil, obviously of the Brits with Brazil, because the abolition happened at the beginning of the 19th century, but Brazil continued having slavery, the only country who did that for another 50 years. I'm looking through that perspective, but I'm also having somehow the permission to contribute to the world of this character, that it wouldn't be something that I might automatically write about, because I write about mainly, we're populated with Latin American, our own Latin American heritage. And I'm writing about a British character as well with those two writers. So it's very interesting, the process of co-writing about that subject and about somehow finding this history of colonization. And she's going to go in total understanding it and go against it and decide to actually reveal it to her family, but then go against it. I do not want to work for Lloyd's, which was the financer of slavery. Sorry, I just went on and on, but I thought this is bang on what I'm working on at the moment. So thanks for the question.
It's fascinating, really.
As in life are limitations and difficulties you may have with a language, not a problem, but an opportunity to be more creative. What do you think about it?
I think it's an opportunity to be more creative, yes. And I now have always someone proofreading a final draft for me, because as a Latin American, I keep changing prepositions, and that's something that I'll probably always do.
Yeah.
In my case, my partner was born in Argentina, but he came here when he was 4. So he's more British, I would say, in the sense that he had this kind of British upbringing and education. And he's actually a really good editor. So I show him everything I write, and we discuss things, and he makes me, not only corrects some mistakes, but he makes me think in a different way when I'm writing, or he makes points, it makes me look at things in a different way. So it questions things that I write, sometimes because I heard it or because I think that's the way that you should write it. So that's my first port of call. And then my editor from the publishers, and then she also sort of looks at the writing. But because I incorporate Spanish words, it's fascinating because sometimes you're creating new words, you're kind of inventing words, and I still like this idea of oddness and strangeness when I write English. I like the fact that when you write, people can notice that there's something quite odd, and because I don't want to hide the fact that I'm not from here. So I like people to understand what I'm writing, but I like for them to notice that strange thing, that oddness that comes when you write from a different culture, language.
Yeah, I totally agree. For me, it's like I've been writing in English since, for me, I was raised in both languages, and it's very natural. However, it was different because it was like American English, in the Dominican Republic. And when you come here, there are differences, but it does make there is an opportunity to be definitely more creative and to play with language and somehow make it your own. And why not, break the molds of whatever it is, and be original. Absolutely.
This is very interesting because there's a question asking about Spanglish. I don't know if you would like to say something.
I use Spanglish mostly because I was fascinated by the experience in the US, by writers who used Spanglish in novels, many writers, many poets. And I like it. It's quite irreverent. I remember going to poetry workshops in the UK and showing some of these poems to my colleagues or my people at workshops, and some were questioning, but this is not English, or this is not Spanish, but this is not allowed. And I was like, well, actually, I'm allowing myself to include them. It's almost a sort of a way of, again, as saying, language is something that evolves, and it's something that is not fixed, and you can actually create new possibilities with language, and you can actually create ideas. And sometimes I use Spanish words in English. I know that there are translations, especially with birds, name of birds or flowers. I know that there is a translation in English, but I want the audience to see that for me, that bird means something different when I write it in Spanish. I'm relating to that bird I saw perhaps in Buenos Aires. There is a similar bird in the UK, but I'm talking to that specific memory, that specific idea. So yeah.
I guess it's also nice to disorientate the audience, so use everything to be written cleanly in English and say, well, here's another language for you. Here's another word in a different language. Go and look what it is.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, yeah, and obviously, like I was saying earlier, I think in the US they do that quite a lot, and they're not afraid, to and there's a lot of interesting literature that comes, and I'm sure it will become to evolve to a point that it's not going to be only about writing abuelito or something, but then and I look forward to seeing how actual language evolves, and then we end up all being a melting pot. And it's like people be forced to learn a different language. And I think it's fascinating.
And how open is the British audience to this sort of use of the language?
It's definitely more open than before, but not all of them, not all the British audience, they're all very open. Sometimes you get people who are actually quite reluctant to read new things, are perhaps challenging their points of views, or perhaps they think that we are sort of mixing the language, or kind of they're not, the language is not pure enough or not English enough, or but that's that's the way we are, and we can't deny the fact that we are from another culture, and we come from different languages, and we're sort of adding something to this kind of conversation. So I know that there's always going to be people who perhaps might not, they're not going to understand what I'm writing or what I'm saying, but the fact that there are some out there, that makes it worth. So yeah,
absolutely. And I think that comes back to who your audience is, and who you're talking to. And at the end, it's like you're gonna turn some people off, but you're gonna turn some people on as well. You know, like Quentin Tarantino says, and it's like, you know, sticking to your guns about what's the best way to be creative and to use language.
Luckily, I think in theatre and film, audiences are more open because also you're supported by a whole other language, which is the visual language, of course.
Yeah.
So somehow it might be, yeah, I think audiences are more open to other languages than English.
Yeah.
In that sense.
All right. Thank you for being here tonight. It's been a pleasure having you. We don't have more time for questions. Sorry, we are on time. So it's been really, really a pleasure. Yes, we learned a lot. And if you would like to say something or where to find your books for the people that are watching.
I'm going to say if anyone has any questions that we haven't answered or I haven't answered in particular, feel free to write to me and I'll answer you. And the work I'm constantly doing now is called Pangea by Limbic Theatre, and it's going to be on, I shouldn't be saying this, but I'm going to say on BBC Taster in the next few months. So
congratulations.
Well,
that's amazing. Being very Latin and clapping.
Yes.
So send me an email or something, and then I'll make sure I'll send the link to you when it's on next year, on Jan, I think, hopefully.
That's really great. Yeah, for me the same. My social media handle is at Karlina Veras, and you can find me on Twitter and Instagram. And I'm very happy to, if anyone wants to engage, answer any questions. My book is Yuyumpa la Calor, and it's in Spanish, and it's also in Italian now, and you can find it on Amazon in Spanish, and I think in Italian as well. Or ask me with Edizione Arcoiris. So, and there's more things coming up, so just stay tuned. But I'm really happy to be here, and thank you, Silvia, thank you, Leo and Gael, for the opportunity, and everyone, thank you, all of you, for listening to us ramble for over an hour.
Yeah, I feel the same. You can contact me at my Twitter address is at Leo Boix, and Instagram as well. My book is going to be out next year in May or June. By Chatto and Windows and Random House, so you can buy it anywhere in the UK or the US. You can get Un Nuevo Sol in all the bookshops in the UK, and you can buy it. Yeah, and you can buy it
together
on Amazon as well. And yeah, it's been a pleasure, and I really enjoyed being here. It was wonderful.
Oh yeah, and my book is in La Tundra bookshop as well. I forgot.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. All right, thank you. And I'm going to. This is going to be goodbye now. Thank you, and see you soon.
All right.
Thank
you.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.